So these are the equipments or the machineries that is used for the production process in the organization. He has to recheck the calculation of the goodwill. So what is the amount of goodwill that is calculated? Investments are basically the assets that are owned by the business in order to earn some revenue or returns. So here the auditor checks what was the historical cost of the investments, then he checks for the fair value. Hello everyone, I am Nikilavati S, Faculty of Commerce, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. I welcome you all for the sessions on Principles and Practice of Auditing. So we are discussing the third chapter, that is Verification and Valuation of Assets and Liabilities. In the previous session, we had discussed about the verification and valuation of the assets, that is land and building. So in today's session, let us discuss some of the other fixed assets, that is verification and valuation of plant and machinery, investments, goodwill, etc. So let us discuss about the verification and valuation of plant and machinery. So plant and machinery is the fixed asset of the company. So these are the equipments or the machineries that is used for the production process in the organization. So whether it is a service organization or a manufacturing organization, the type of machineries or the equipments that are used are referred to as the machineries which help them for production process. Then some of the verification and valuation key points that the auditor must analyze while verifying or valuating the plant and machinery, because a plant and machinery's value must be recorded correctly and accurately, because there is huge investment that is made on the machineries. So especially when we talk about the manufacturing industry, a huge investment is made on the machineries. So it is important to evaluate the true value of the machineries and the plant, and also to record them properly and valuate them properly and record in the financial statements. The auditor must physically inspect, or he has to observe whether the value of that plant and machinery, whatever they have mentioned in the balance sheet, is really existing or not as on the balance sheet date. So then he has to go for examining the purchase invoices. So the invoices or the documents that are obtained at the time of purchasing the machineries. So it helps them to analyze properly what is the value of the machineries as on the balance sheet date. So he has to check for the invoices and documents. The auditor has to review the depreciation records. So the depreciation is the value that is deducted based on the useful life of an asset. So he has to check for whether the depreciation is deducted or not, because machineries are subjected to wear and tear or obsolescence. So based on that, whether the depreciation is calculated and whether the machinery has been depreciated or not, or whether the methods that are used to calculate the depreciation is right or not. Then he has to verify or examine even the maintenance records. So here the maintenance is related to the maintenance of the plant and machinery, where it involves rechecking whether the machineries are functioning properly or not, and the expenses that is spent for the maintenance, then the repairs, how often the repairs has been done for the machineries, etc. So then when it comes to the valuation, valuation here means the measure of the value of the plant and machinery. So how the valuation is done, how the value is derived. So basically the historical cost here refers to the cost at which the plant and machineries were purchased at the beginning. So it includes the purchase cost, transportation cost, installation cost, etc. Then it also includes the calculation of depreciation. So as we discussed earlier, depreciation is the value that is deducted based on the wear and tear use or obsolescence. So after depreciating that particular value from the plant and machinery, then the true value of the plant and machinery will be known. Then obsolescence. So obsolescence, sometimes the machineries becomes obsolete because of the outdated technology. So because of the passage of time. So here the auditor has to check whether the obsolescence value is calculated properly or not. Then also if there is revaluation, so if the company is revaluating its assets and liabilities, whether the valuation of plant and machinery is done properly or not, it is revalued or not. So it should be derived based on the current market price for that particular machinery. So next, let us move on to the next asset, that is verification and valuation of goodwill. So goodwill, as we all know, is the value of reputation of a business. Goodwill is an intangible asset that arises at the time of acquiring a new business. So this is the value that is paid to the other company, which is more than the fair value or the net value of the assets of that particular company. It represents the company's reputation, customer loyalty, as well as other factors that contribute for the company's future profits. So when it comes to the verification of the goodwill, here the auditor has to review the acquisition documents. The goodwill arises at the time of acquiring a new business or at the time of acquisition. So here the auditor has to check for all kinds of documents which is indicating the amount of goodwill that is paid at the time of acquiring a new business. Then he has to recheck the calculation of the goodwill. So what is the amount of goodwill that is calculated? So how was the amount? Say for example, if the company A acquires company B for 50 crores and the actual net value of the assets is 40 crore, then the remaining 10 crores can be the goodwill or the value of the goodwill. So here how the goodwill was calculated, then the auditor has to check for the impairment. So basically the goodwill is an intangible asset. So it won't undergo depreciation, it will have impairment. So if the value of the goodwill is overvalued, so sometimes through the passage of time the value of the reputation may come down, or here the auditor has to check whether the impairment has been regularly calculated or not. So then when it comes to the valuation, valuation is again the calculation of goodwill. So in the calculation of goodwill, the auditor has to ensure what was the initial valuation that was done for the goodwill. Goodwill is initially valued at the time of acquisition, that it is the excess purchase consideration over fair value of the net assets of the company. Then the auditor has to check for the impairment, whether the value of the goodwill has been written down or not. Say for example, if you take the same example, if the value of the goodwill at the time of acquisition was 10 crores and after 5 years, if it is recorded still as 10 crores, but the reputation has come down and the actual value of goodwill is 9.5 crores, then so the remaining 50,000 can be deducted. So here proper valuation of impairment is also checked by the auditor, then no amortization. So as the goodwill is not a physical asset, it is not subjected to any kind of amortization or the depreciation. Even the IFRS 3 says that the goodwill is not subjected to depreciation and any kinds of amortization. So this was all regarding the verification and valuation of goodwill. Now let us look into the verification and valuation of investments. So what are investments? Investments are basically the assets that are owned by the business in order to earn some revenue or returns. So these investments may be short-term investments or long-term investment. It depends on the period for which the company has held its investments. So then it might be the investment may be the marketable securities, stock, bonds, debentures, etc. The auditor at the time of auditing and verifying and calculating the valuation of investments, so especially when it comes to the verification, he has to examine the investment documents. So the main evidence or the proof for all these assets, it's its documents or the vouchers or the purchase documents. So he has to check for the the documents showing the investment that is made by the company, whether these investments that are mentioned in the balance sheet are truly made by the business or not. So he has to check for the documents, then he has to check for the market value. That means what is the fair value of that particular investment, whether the calculation of fair value of the investments that is made by the company is calculated properly or not. Then after that he has to review the interest and dividend income. So what are the amount of interest or the dividend that is received by the company, and whether all these receivables of interest or dividend is properly recorded or not. So then the auditor has to check for the disclosure review, whether all the investment that is the company has made has been disclosed properly in the balance sheet or not, whether these investments are classified properly or not. Again, it might be classified as short-term investments and long-term investments, and these depends on the period for which the company has held their investments. Then coming to the valuation of investments, so some of the key points includes checking for the historical cost. So historical cost, basically it is the initial value at the time of making investment. So the cost at the time of making investment, or the value that was there at the time of making investments. Just like any assets that are recorded at its historical price, even the investment are to be recorded first at historical cost. So here the auditor checks what was the historical cost of the investments, then he checks for the fair value. So here the fair value is the value of the current market price for that particular investments. For marketable securities, the fair value is determined by the market price at the time of reporting. If the investments are held for trading, their value is recorded at the fair value. Then the auditor has to check for the amortized cost. That means especially for the debt amounts or the marketable securities, then bonds, here whether the amortized cost has been deducted properly or not, whether it is calculated or not, that is to be checked by the auditor. Then the impairment. If the market value of the investment has been reduced or if it comes down, here the auditor ensures that particular impairment cost has been reduced. So this was all regarding the verification and valuation of plant and machineries, goodwill and investments. So verification and valuation of these fixed assets is very much crucial in order to depict the true financial position or the financial standing of the business. Hope you all have understood the concepts well. Thank you.